Hey guys, hi, welcome back once again. My name is Vaishali, and having learned quite a few things from, through, and from within human interactions, and having pursued and completed my master's in business administration and clinical psychology, I today wish to talk about how the micro problems of our life are actually the resultant of the macro problems. How the individual or the personal and the interpersonal, i.e., the relational problems, are also the microcosm of the macrocosm. And in a way, it can be correlated with the quote by Peter Senge that the problems of today are the resultant of the solutions of yesterday. Which to a very large degree also addresses the intergenerational passage of things, the intergenerational passage of information, the intergenerational passage of the blessings and even the banes. Which in a way again beautifully coincides with the saying that this person is a chip of the old block. So, how do we interconnect all of these thoughts and all of these sayings and all of these metaphors? And how is our personal level problems a microcosm of the macrocosm itself? So, let's consider some realistic examples, which in a way will help us connect and interweave the two. The rise in social media addiction is as much a personal level and a relational, interrelational problem or an issue as it is a global problem, at least in major parts of the world. The rising levels of suicidality cases is as much a personal level problem, an interrelational problem, as it is a global problem. The rising levels of people feeling lonely despite being in relationships and despite we having many more number of people in the world than at any other point in history in the human civilization, the pandemic levels of loneliness that people feel is as much a personal, a relational problem, a social problem, an interpersonal problem, as it is a global level problem. And in a way, it also then tells us that as much as all of those things, all of the human issues needs to be addressed on the personal and on the interpersonal level, it also needs to be addressed on the pandemic level. It also needs to be addressed on the global level. Because the moment we make it relatively inclusive, it reduces the burden of guilt and shame. It creates a compassionate space for everything and everybody to exist without shutting them out, without shunning them out, and without making anybody feel abandoned or they not belonged. Because as social species, it's one of our primary requisites to feel belonged within a certain group of people. To feel safe within a certain group of people, to be able to trust or develop trust within a certain group and community of people. Without it, we actually feel like the lost ship in the vast oceans, who feels helpless and who feels lost, who feels abandoned and thereby threatened and thereby unsafe. And anything and anybody that feels unsafe naturally acts from the place of fight, flight, or freeze. Which are our survival instincts. But if they become a chronic thing, if they are persistently present in our lives, then they become dysfunctional. Then they become unhelpful. Then they become unhealthy even. Now, connecting that and correlating that with another saying, with another quote by Peter Senge, which essentially said, and I might be paraphrasing here, that the problems of today are the resultant of the solutions of yesterday. Can best be understood by a few examples. Like at one point in time in our history, we had the system of dowry. Now it was a systemic solution to address a certain thing. And probably when it was put in practice, it had its own value, it had its own merit, it had its own solution. When kids who were married earlier, or at least the girls who were married earlier, were given something called as Sridhan, and it was to enable that girl child to have her own reserves financially in case some unforeseen situation propped up, which naturally would. But unfortunately, the solution that was brought up at that point in time much later became the problem, the dowry problem. And the solution to that after a point in time became that today dowry is considered a criminal offense. Now, at this point in time, it's working, and yet we cannot foresee if it might become the problem in the near future. Likewise, there used to be a custom and thereby a system which had the practice of practicing Johar and Sati, wherein women were burnt alive along with the dead body of their husband, of their deceased husband. And maybe at that point in time, however gruesome it might sound to be, however inhuman and however cruel it might sound to be, it was practiced because it had certain advantages, or at least it served certain means to an end result. And it was a macro problem, it was a nation level problem which affected individuals and their relationships on a very personal and interpersonal levels. And in a similar way, if I can cite another example, a real life example, which at one point in time was also a real life example, probably still exists today, was shown in the movie Toilet Ek Prem Katha, wherein just a few decades back, people, or at least a chunk of India, did not have the basic amenity of toilets in their homes. They did not have the basic provision of having a washroom, a personal washroom for themselves. Even having baths was done in open places, near the bank of the river or near the lakes. Which of course today most of us would frown upon, would find it disgusting, would find it unappealing, would even find it unhygienic and unpleasant. Yet it was a macro level problem. It was a systemic problem. It was a problem within the system that affected most people on the personal and interpersonal levels. And like Jiddu Krishnamurti, who was also popularly and lovingly known as JK, had once said that you cannot expect individuals to be healthy in a society that's essentially unhealthy. In a way, kind of pointing out that the macro and the micro are interconnected. That just like COVID had hit the world on the macro level, it had affected people and their relationships, their professional life as well, on the micro level. And unless we begin to become aware of these interconnections, we'll keep creating solutions that might become the problem for the future. Let's try and be aware of those dynamics, of those interplays. Because if we aren't, we cannot take even the personal responsibility for interplaying those very same things. Let's try and do that for ourselves, and I will see you once again the next week. Till then, stay tuned in. And guys, if you do like the contextual content of these videos, please do like, share, and subscribe.